Taken together, the dominant theme that really emerges from this analysis is that poor outcomes are linked to social deprivation and family turbulence, and that disconnection from school in the form of truancy and exclusion in the early teenage years is a key trigger point for amplified contact with criminal justice. Social deprivation, family turbulence, school exclusion, factors requiring social, not criminal justice responses. Okay, thank you. Right, on then to my final fact, fact 4, that diversionary strategies and informal measures facilitate processes from desistance from offending. I'm going to be a little bit shorter now on my evidence. Our analysis indicates that outcomes for serious offenders who are drawn furthest into the system in the crucial 13 to 15-year-old period are far worse than from matched groups of serious offenders who either have no contact with agencies at all or who are dealt with more informally and diverted away from the system. Indeed, our findings show that compulsory measures of care appear to inhibit the normal process of desistance from offending that is evident from round about age 14 in the cohort as a whole. Conversely, police warnings or charges, but then no further action, are associated with a significant reduction in serious offending 1 year later. And I put the reference to the Heisinger research at the bottom of this slide to indicate again that we are not a lone voice. There is growing evidence from a range of longitudinal studies internationally that the greater the severity of sanctioning, the more damaging this is for the youngsters. Heisinger and colleagues' work is based on 2 longitudinal projects, one in Bremen, Germany, and the other in Denver, the USA. And they found that arrests and sanctions only had a very limited impact on offending, resulting, for the most part, in maintenance or increases in the previous level of offending, with increases being most likely in the cases given the most severe sanction. And the similarity between these sites is very striking, given the very big differences in the ethos of the youth justice system in Germany, which is much more lenient, much more focused on diversion, from that of Denver, which is much more punitive. And propels people much more quickly into court. Now, compounding the effect of system contact, we also have evidence that the most vulnerable, the most victimised children who are referred to the children's hearing system and juvenile justice get propelled into the adult criminal justice system at a very early stage. In our study, by age 22, over half, 55% of the children referred to the children's hearing system on offence grounds had at least one criminal conviction in the adult system by age 22. And that's a conviction rate 5.5 times higher than for other people in the cohort. And 13% had experienced at least one period of detention. That's a detention rate 33 times higher than amongst other groups in the cohort. Looking at more detail, the factors which predict which children referred to juvenile justice end up in the adult criminal justice system, these are again the same sorts of things I've been mentioning: being excluded from school by 3rd year of education, secondary education, having an early history of police warnings and charges, and also being male. What is particularly striking about this analysis, though, is that volume of needs is also a key predictor of later criminal conviction. So what we seem to be doing in Scotland, and I hope we don't do this in Ireland, is that we shove the most vulnerable children known to juvenile justice system into the adult system, often at the earliest possible opportunity, and the outcomes are very bad. Last slide, last bit of fact. Of those in the cohort who had experience of residential care of any sort, that is secure care or residential school by their 16th birthday, over 3/4 of them had a criminal conviction by age 22, and 1 in 3 had been imprisoned at least once, 1 in 3 of those in residential care. Of those in the cohort who had been experienced to a period of imprisonment by age 18, 80% had at least one further conviction by age 22, and 70% were resentenced to a period of imprisonment, a kind of complete recycling. Okay, so those then are the facts. On then to the last bit of my paper, the policy implications. So, given that I hope I've shown you, demonstrated that serious offending is linked to victimisation and social adversity, the early identification of at-risk children is fraught with difficulties, and there is a risk of creating a self-fulfilling prophecy, and given that diversionary strategies are effective, I think the key conundrum that faces policymakers should be how to develop and deliver a model of youth justice which is holistic in orientation with interventions proportionate to need, but one which operates on the principle of maximum diversion. And this slide sets out some of the ways in which this might be done. And this focuses on 3 key stages. First of all, early years intervention. Because of the difficulties in identifying which specific individuals would go on to become chronic serious offenders, and because of the dangers of labelling and stigmatising families, I would argue for a form of universal targeting, providing support mechanisms for all children and families, and particularly in areas in which there are concentrations of poverty and social malaise. Turning to the early to mid-teenage years, a transitional mode into teenage years, because such a high proportion of vulnerable serious offenders actually are unknown to agencies, the Edinburgh study findings highlight the continued need for informal, voluntary sector, open-door outreach services for vulnerable youngsters. Such services have an absolutely crucial role to play in supporting some of our most damaged youngsters and in helping to diminish the unreported and unrecorded violence and other forms of serious offending that occur in some communities. There is also a need to understand and respond better to critical moments in the early to mid-teenage years, and our findings have shown that school exclusion is a key critical moment impacting adversely on subsequent conviction trajectories. So there is an urgent need to develop more imaginative ways of retaining challenging children within mainstream educational provision. Moreover, as gatekeepers to the care and justice systems, and as the principal agency which first encounters many problematic children, the police have a key role to play in the delivery of justice for children. In particular, there is a need to continue to develop policing strategies that provide a swift, firm but flexible response to youth offending, and one that offers meaningful diversion where possible. However, for those offenders that do enter the youth justice system, I would argue that intervention should be based on what Fergus McNeill has termed a desistance paradigm for offender management. A desistance paradigm aims to help the child construct a non-offender identity to break through ascribed labels. It involves a close one-to-one relationship with a key worker who acts as an advocate for the child, and crucially it involves continuity in who that key worker is. Importantly, though, for this work to be effective, it has to be undertaken within a broader context of educational inclusion and meaningful economic opportunity. Finally, in terms of transitions into early adulthood, in addition to mechanisms through which young people gain access to further education, to training or employment, there's a need to provide targeted and intensive support for those who are leaving the institutional care system and for vulnerable offenders at the intersections between the youth and adult system, with the aim of preventing such youngsters effectively serving a life sentence by instalments. Having said this, however, my colourful slide's now coming, I hope. Last one, yes. Okay. I think there's a need for a bolder vision on the part of policymakers. A vision, I think, which makes social justice solutions the starting point for discussions on how to tackle youth crime. And with this in mind, I'm offering this very final model, which I've borrowed from Bronfer and Benner by way of Martins, two people that this has come from. Now, although you can't see it, it's beautifully coloured in. It is a model which purports to show the ecology of human development, but one I think that can be readily transplanted into youth justice. As indicated on the slide, the child, not an offender, let's not talk about offenders, let's talk about children, is placed at the heart of the model. It recognises that the well-being of the child is promoted by micro-level factors that surround it, linked to parental and peer socialisation processes. It's promoted by meso-level factors, those are the yellow things there, the meso-level factors such as neighbourhood, school and parental work situation, which impact on the capacity of the micro-level factors to fulfil their particular roles. And is also prompted by the macro-level factors, the green things on the outside of this slide here, which include things like labour markets, family and childcare policy. And these, in turn, impact on the efficacy of both the meso and micro-level factors. This is a holistic model. It is focused on need and one that is predicated on social justice. Thank you.